The wall clock struck 7:42 a.m. as Darius Cole boarded Apex Air Flight 447 from San Francisco to New York, a flight that only hours later would shake the entire aviation industry. He settled into seat 3A in business class. The black leather seat was cool to the touch, the morning light spilling softly through the window beside him. A laptop glowed briefly with rows of revenue charts from Cole Capital Partners before he closed it, exhaling quietly. He planned to get a few hours of sleep. To anyone watching, he was just another man in a grey suit, no tie, polished black shoes, quiet, unremarkable, invisible among the wealthy travelers around him. But Evan Brooks, the chief flight attendant, didn't see him that way. His eyes flicked over Darius's boarding pass, his skin color, and the worn canvas backpack tucked neatly beneath the seat, something almost no one carried in business class. Evan's gaze lingered just long enough for the air between them to tighten. Then he stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to move to seat 5B, he said, voice polite, but edged with glassy coldness. Darius looked up, his tone low, steady. "I booked 3A 3 weeks ago." "Yes, but we have a VIP passenger who requires this seat. You'll remain in business class. It's just a minor adjustment." A chill slid down Darius's spine. He had heard this tone 1,000 times before, the kind of request that wasn't really a request, but an order wrapped in courtesy. He gave a faint smile, though his eyes stayed firm. "I paid for this seat. I'm not moving." For a few seconds, Evan just stood there. The corner of his mouth twitched, a tiny spasm of irritation at being refused. "Sir," he said slowly, "I don't think you want to make this more complicated." The words fell like a blade gliding across glass. Passengers nearby lifted their heads, glanced over, then quickly looked away. No one spoke, but everyone knew something wasn't right. Darius met Evan's eyes, his voice deepening. "I'm not making it complicated. I'm simply sitting where I belong." The air thickened. Evan's hand tightened around his radio, and he turned away. Just then, a voice boomed from the cabin door, loud, commanding, brimming with arrogance. "Where's my seat?" A man entered like he owned the sky itself. Victor Lang, navy suit, silver hair slicked back, a gold Rolex flashing under the cabin lights. Every step he took carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His gaze landed on Darius, short but sharp enough to reveal exactly what he thought. A man like him didn't belong here. "That's my seat." Evan bowed slightly. "Mr. Lang, we're resolving the issue." "Resolving what?" Victor snapped. "I've sat here for 15 years. Platinum member. I spend hundreds of millions with this airline, and now I'm waiting?" Darius didn't move. He didn't flinch. "Seat 3A is mine. I booked it. I paid for it." Victor laughed, a dry, cutting sound. "Do you know who I am?" "No," Darius replied evenly. "Victor Lang, Lang International. I practically pay everyone in this airline. Do you understand that?" Silence gripped the cabin. Eyes turned toward them. A few passengers raised their phones discreetly. Darius stared back. "If you pay them, then perhaps you should also know that others pay for the right to be respected." Evan fumbled for words. Victor's face reddened. A whisper rippled through row 4. "Who is he? How dare he talk to Victor Lang like that? Victor leaned closer, his breath thick with entitlement. I'll say this once more. Stand up. Darius raised an eyebrow. And I'll say it once more. I won't. The air turned dangerously still. Evan's grip on the radio tightened. Victor stepped back, his expression darkening. Fine, he said quietly, fury seething beneath his words. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Darius didn't respond. He unlocked his phone, tapped record, and turned toward the window, where the sky stretched grey and metallic. He knew the storm was coming. But this time, he wouldn't step aside. He had been dismissed before, belittled before, told to give up his place, both literally and figuratively. But not today. The story of Apex Air Flight 447 and the man in seat 3A had just begun. The air inside Apex Air Flight 447's business class cabin grew thick, charged like static moving across bare nerves. Every seat from 2A to 4C fell silent. The only sounds were the faint hiss of the air conditioner and the distant clatter of a suitcase wheel rolling toward the cabin door. Victor Lang stood there, one hand gripping the armrest of seat 3A, his gaze heavy with authority. At 50-6, he was the embodiment of success built on entitlement, tanned skin, a square jaw, and gold weighing down his wrist. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone made people bow. But not Darius Cole. Darius lifted his head, meeting his eyes. Mr. Lang, I booked this seat, and I'm going to stay in it. A simple sentence, yet in that moment, it struck Victor like a slap to the ego of a man long accustomed to dominance. Victor smirked. Do you know who you're talking to? A passenger, just like me. Darius replied, his tone calm but cold. Evan Brooks, the chief flight attendant, swallowed hard. He glanced around the cabin, searching for a sympathetic face, but found only curiosity and fear. A few passengers discreetly raised their phones to record. Evan lowered his voice, trying to sound reasonable. Mr. Lang, please calm down. I'll rearrange it. But Victor wasn't the type to wait. No need to rearrange anything. Just remove him from my seat. His voice rose, intentionally loud enough for everyone to hear. Darius didn't react. He had learned that silence could speak louder than any argument. Yet the look in his eyes made Evan uneasy. It wasn't the look of a frightened customer. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what rights he had. A middle-aged woman in 4B leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Who is that man? He's so composed." Her husband shook his head softly. Probably just one of those stubborn types trying to make a point. Victor turned, his tone booming. I spend over $300 million a year with Apex Air. I don't argue. If I want an entire row, I'll take it. The cabin froze. Some passengers glanced toward Darius, their eyes caught between pity and expectation, waiting for him to yield. Evan leaned down, his voice barely above a whisper. Sir, you can avoid all this trouble by just moving to another seat. I'll make sure you get a voucher and a free upgrade for your next 3 flights. Darius exhaled, as if he had just heard something absurd. Mr. Brooks, I don't need vouchers. I just want the seat I paid for. Victor laughed, a hollow, cutting sound. You think you're fighting for justice or something? Don't be dramatic. It's just a seat. Darius turned his head slightly, his voice soft but solid. No, Mr. Lang, it's a principle. In that instant, Victor's expression darkened. His eyes flashed with anger and disbelief, as if a pawn had dared to defy the hand that moved it. He leaned toward Evan, whispering harshly, "Call the cabin manager. And if she can't handle it, call security." Evan hesitated. "Mr. Lang, that might cause trouble if—" Victor glared. "I don't pay to be inconvenienced. Do it." Evan nodded quickly, fumbling for his radio. Meanwhile, Darius pulled out his phone, opened the voice recorder, and pressed record. Not out of fear, but from the reflex of a man who had spent a lifetime being doubted. The screen lit up, reflecting his face in the cabin light, calm, unflinching, carrying a kind of power no one else in the room could see. Behind him, whispers rippled. "What's happening?" "They say Lang's demanding the seat." "Who's the other guy?" "No idea. Looks ordinary enough." From the front of the cabin, Monica Reyes, the cabin manager, appeared. Hair tied neatly, a professional smile masking a wary expression. "What seems to be the issue here?" Evan stepped forward. "This passenger refused to move for a VIP guest." Monica turned to Darius. "Sir, I'm sure you understand. Sometimes we have to accommodate our loyal flyers." Darius met her gaze. "I understand. But I'm also a paying customer." That answer caught her off guard, not because of the words, but because of how he said them. Steady, assured, the tone of someone more accustomed to leading than obeying. For a brief second, Monica sensed something was off about this situation. But before she could respond, Victor interrupted. "There's nothing left to discuss. I want him out of that seat. Now." Monica inhaled, taking out her tablet, her voice mechanical. "I'll recheck the booking." But inside, she knew, no matter the result, this flight would not be ordinary. As she bent to verify the list, Darius looked out the window. Sunlight glinted across the wing. He thought quietly to himself, "It's happening again. But this time, I won't stay silent." He didn't yet know that in just a few hours, the very seat they tried to take from him would become the one that saved the entire flight. The glow from Monica Reyes's tablet cast a pale white light across her face. Her fingers moved quickly over the passenger list, each line of data scrolling past in heavy silence. The air in the cabin had thickened so much that even the sound of a heartbeat seemed audible. "Seat 3A," she read slowly, "was booked 20th and 2 days ago, fully paid with a corporate card." She looked up, first at Darius, then at Victor. "Mr. Cole is the rightful holder of this seat." Darius's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into a gesture of control. Victor, on the other hand, froze for a moment before letting out a short, bitter laugh. "Then move him to 5B. What's there to discuss?" "Mr. Lang," Monica said quietly, "we can't force a passenger to give up their seat when their ticket is valid." "Can't?" Victor repeated, his tone shifting from disbelief to anger. "Do you know who you're talking to? I've flown with Apex for 15 years. Lifetime platinum. I spend hundreds of millions of dollars. I will not be refused by someone like him." The last words slipped from his mouth like a cold blade cutting through the air. Someone like him. Everyone in the cabin heard it, and everyone knew exactly what it meant. A woman in seat 4C reached over to touch her husband's arm, her eyes uneasy. A young businessman in 2A looked up and shook his head slightly. The rest of the cabin stayed quiet, not because they had no opinion, but because they didn't dare to step into something that felt dangerous. Darius raised his head. In the dim gold light, his eyes held no anger, only a chilling clarity. "Mr. Lang," he said slowly, "I understand you're used to getting everything you want. But not today." Victor's face flushed red, his jaw tightening. He turned to Evan, his voice heavy and sharp. "Call security, right now." Evan swallowed hard. He knew this wasn't about a seat anymore. But Victor's eyes commanded him like a leash. He lifted the radio and spoke into the mic. "Requesting assistance in business class, gate 24A. As he lowered it, Darius had already picked up his phone, opened his messages, and typed quickly. "Julia, flight 447. Recording. Signs of discrimination. Stay alert." He hit send and set the phone on the tray table. His hands didn't shake. His heartbeat was steady, the rhythm of a man who had weathered much worse storms. He had heard that tone before, in investor meetings where a billionaire once asked, "Who do you work for?" And he replied, "No, I own the company." He had walked into 5-star hotels, only to be stopped by security asking, "Deliveries use the back entrance." Every moment like that, every look, every word, had hardened inside him into something thick and silent, both armor and scar. Monica looked at him, hesitation flickering in her eyes. "Mr. Cole, I understand this is upsetting, but please cooperate. We're only trying to satisfy everyone." Darius tilted his head slightly, his voice low but crisp. "Satisfy, or keep the wealthy comfortable?" She froze. Evan stood beside her, avoiding his gaze. That question wasn't just for them. It was for the entire system, built on quiet compliance. Less than 2 minutes later, 2 airport security officers appeared. Black uniforms, radios on their belts, footsteps firm. They stopped at row 3, their eyes scanning the situation with a mix of caution and fatigue. "What's going on here?" the older one asked, voice gravelly. Monica answered, "This passenger refused to move when asked to make room for a VIP client." "Is his ticket valid?" the officer asked. Monica hesitated. "Yes, but—" "Then," he cut in, "he has the right to stay." Victor jumped in, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You don't understand. I'm Victor Lang. I bankroll this entire airline." The younger officer looked at him, his expression unchanged. "And did you book this seat, sir?" That simple question hit the cabin like an invisible slap. Victor's mouth opened, but no words came. I requested it." Darius spoke quietly, his voice steady as steel. "Requesting and paying are not the same thing." The cabin erupted in murmurs. A passenger lifted their phone to record. Another whispered, "Did he really just say that?" Evan stepped back, his pulse racing. He felt the line between following orders and being complicit in something wrong begin to crumble. Darius looked around, his eyes passing over every witness. He wasn't seeking sympathy. He just wanted them to see that sometimes simply staying seated is an act of resistance stronger than any shout. "Mr. Cole," Monica said softly now, her voice tinged with pleading. "Please, don't make this harder than it has to be." Darius replied evenly, his tone calm but unyielding. "Ms. Reyes, I'm not making it harder. I'm just refusing to disappear." The words fell into the cabin like a spark into dry air. Everyone stopped breathing, and at the back of the cabin, a phone camera kept recording, capturing every glance, every breath, every second of a moment that was about to shake an entire system. The business class door closed, sealing into the cold metallic scent of the cabin and the uneven breaths of people pretending to stay calm. Every pair of eyes turned toward Monica Reyes, the woman standing between two forces of power. On one side, Victor Lang, the privileged VIP. On the other, Darius Cole, the man she had assumed was just another ordinary passenger. Monica straightened her collar and forced a professional smile. "Mr. Lang, please give me 1 minute to handle this properly." Victor folded his arms, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I've waited long enough, Monica. I want to sit down. Now." She turned to Darius, her gaze carrying the hesitation of someone speaking for a conscience she didn't dare express aloud. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "we're really trying to find a solution, something that keeps everyone comfortable." Darius looked up, calm but focused, his eyes deep and still as water. "What solution are you offering?" Monica swallowed hard. "We can move you to seat 5B. It's more spacious, near the exit row. You'll receive a $500 voucher and complimentary upgrades for your next 3 flights. The cabin fell silent. It was a generous offer for someone who wanted to avoid trouble. But Darius said nothing. He looked out the window, seeing his own reflection in the glass, a dark-skinned man in a modest grey suit, sitting in a world that was never built to welcome him. Then he turned back, his voice low but clear. "I don't need a voucher. I need respect." Victor let out a dry, cutting laugh that echoed like metal scraping glass. "Respect? You're on an airplane, not in a civics class." Darius tilted his head slightly. "And maybe that's exactly why someone needs to remind you of it." Monica felt a chill race through her veins. She glanced quickly around the cabin. Some passengers buried their faces in their phones, pretending to work. Others discreetly raised theirs, the glow of recording screens flickering in the dim light. Evan stood beside her and whispered, "Monica, we should end this. He's not wrong." She shot him a sharp look. "Quiet, Evan. This isn't the time." Victor folded his arms again, looking at Darius as though he were a stain refusing to be wiped away. "This is between me and the airline. Don't make it a spectacle." Darius replied, still calm, still steady. "I am the airline's customer too, Mr. Lang. The only difference is I didn't buy my ticket with privilege." The air stretched tight as a pulled string. Monica gripped her tablet, eyes fixed on the screen, to avoid meeting his. "Mr. Cole," she said, "please understand, we have policies for our loyal customers." "And what about policies for those who paid first?" Darius asked. His voice wasn't raised, but the words cut sharp enough to make her freeze. That tone, slow, controlled but firm, made Monica realize she wasn't speaking to just a passenger. She was facing someone who understood authority far better than she did. Victor scowled, his voice low and threatening. "Fine. Call security. If the airline won't handle this, I will." Evan stepped back, wanting no part of the explosion about to happen. "Mr. Lang, please, stay calm." "Calm?" Victor barked. "Do you even know who I am?" "Yes," Darius interrupted. "A man who believes money can buy justice. But maybe today it won't buy seat 3A. Victor spun around, fury flaring in his eyes. "You're playing with fire, Cole. I could have you banned from every flight for life." Darius stared straight back, unblinking. "And I could make sure this entire system gets exposed to the light." Monica inhaled sharply. It felt like she was witnessing an uneven fight, except the man who was underestimated was the one controlling the board. She turned to Victor, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound composed. "Mr. Lang, please, control yourself. Everyone's watching." Victor lowered his voice, but his next words were like a hidden blade behind a smile. "You know, Cole, people like you, always convinced you're doing the right thing, until the real world shows you where you actually belong." The cabin went utterly silent. Each word struck like a hammer against centuries of prejudice. Darius took a slow breath, his gaze shifting from Victor to Monica. "I don't need you to defend me. I just need you to witness this." Monica pressed her lips together, saying nothing. Then she noticed the faint red glow on Darius's phone, the recording light still blinking. He was capturing everything, every voice, every tone, every tense breath in that airless cabin. "Are you recording this?" Victor snapped. "No," Darius replied evenly. "I'm recording history." A few passengers let out quiet gasps, not of laughter, but of disbelief at his composure. Monica turned away, unsure what to do. She pressed her radio. "Requesting additional support. Managerial level." A voice replied from the front. "Copy that. On the way." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Darius leaned back into his seat, closed his eyes for a brief moment, steadying the rhythm of his heartbeat. He knew this wasn't a fight over a seat. It was about what that seat represented. Outside the window, sunlight streaked across the airplane's wing, casting a golden glow over his face, like a silent herald of the truth that was about to be revealed. The sound of polished shoes struck the thick carpet, steady, deliberate, final. Two security officers appeared at the front of the cabin. Harold Kim, a grey, bearded man in his 50s who moved with patient authority, and Luis Ortega, younger, about 30, 4, his sharp brown eyes quietly scanning everything. The entire business class fell silent. Every gaze locked onto seat 3A, where Darius Cole sat calmly, hands clasped, his expression unnervingly composed. "Good morning," Harold said, his voice low and even. "What seems to be the issue here?" Monica Reyes took a slow breath, forcing her voice steady. "This passenger, Mr. Cole, has refused to change seats as requested by the crew to make room for a VIP. Mr. Lang here has been a platinum member for 15 years. Harold nodded, turning to Darius. "Sir, is it true that you're refusing to move?" Darius met his eyes. "No. I'm refusing to surrender a right I paid for." The answer made Luis raise an eyebrow. He pulled out a small notebook and scribbled a few quick words. "To confirm," he asked, "his ticket is valid?" Monica hesitated, then replied, Yes, valid. Seat 3A was booked and paid for 22 days ago. Louise glanced at Harold. Then what's the problem? No one answered. Only Victor Lang, face flushed red, slammed his palm lightly against the seat. The problem, he thundered, is that I'm Victor Lang. I spend over $300 million a year with this airline. I requested seat 3A, and I deserve it. Harold sighed softly, unruffled by the outburst. Sir, a request doesn't equal a right, if the passenger booked it first. Are you taking his side? Victor snapped, his tone dripping with fury and disdain. He's obviously just some lucky guy who happened to get a business-class ticket. Look at him. Darius didn't flinch. He sat in silence, but each word hit him like a weight sinking deep, stirring memories long buried. He remembered his first job at Boeing, when a manager once asked, "Who are you cleaning for?" just because he carried a drafting pencil instead of a tie. He remembered fundraising for Cole Capital when an investor said, "We'd like to meet the founder," not realizing he was speaking to him. Each recollection felt like a shard of glass, reflecting the moment he was living now. Harold looked at Darius, voice firm but measured. Mr. Cole, I have to ask one last time. Are you willing to move to avoid further disruption? Darius drew in a slow breath, then spoke clearly. No, I'm not moving. Not out of stubbornness. But because if I do, I'll be saying that someone like me doesn't belong here. The cabin went completely still. The words landed softly but carried more weight than any shout. Victor scoffed, shaking his head. Oh, here we go. The victim act. I swear everyone wants to play the oppressed these days. I'm just asking for a seat, not starting a race war. Darius turned his head toward him. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried something deeper. Sadness. You're not asking for a seat. You're asking for a place above others. Evan, standing nearby, gripped his radio so tightly his knuckles whitened. Sweat trickled down his wrist. He knew Darius was right, and he knew he was part of the system that made it possible. Monica bit her lip, her voice trembling. Mr. Cole, if you refuse to comply with crew instructions, I'll have to ask security to escort you off the plane. Darius leaned slightly forward, slowly pulling out his phone. He held it up, the screen glowing, the red recording icon pulsing steadily. I've recorded this entire exchange from the moment I was asked to move, to when Mr. Lang said, "Someone like him." Everything is saved. And now, he paused, his tone deepening. I'm sending a copy to my legal team. Monica went pale. Evan whispered, Your legal team? That's right, Darius said, his face unchanged. Julia Park, General Counsel of Cole Capital Partners. She's listening. The air froze. Louise glanced at Harold, an unspoken warning passing between them. Darius continued. She's also calling Thomas Whitaker, the CEO of Apex Air. I imagine he'll be interested to know his staff is about to force an 18% shareholder out of a paid seat. The words hit like thunder cracking through the cabin. Victor's face stiffened, his mouth falling open in disbelief. Shareholder? What? Darius said nothing. He placed his phone on the tray table, the red recording light blinking softly. You can call for more security if you'd like, he said quietly. But remember, every step they take toward me, becomes another piece of evidence in a civil rights lawsuit. Harold didn't move. He looked at Darius, then Victor, and it was clear which man held the law on his side. Louis spoke softly. "Mr. Lang, perhaps we should wait for the senior flight officer to decide." Victor opened his mouth to argue, but Darius's calm, cold stare stopped him mid-breath. Monica, shaken, raised her radio. "Requesting the captain to the business class cabin. Urgent." From the front of the plane, a commanding voice replied, "What's going on back here?" Captain Robert Hale appeared, a tall, silver-haired man of 50, ate with the kind of presence that quieted rooms. He moved down the aisle, his gaze sweeping over everyone, the guards, Monica, Victor, and finally Darius. "We're 20 to 8 minutes behind schedule. Can someone tell me what's happening with seat 3A? Monica swallowed. "Captain, this passenger is refusing to move for a VIP. Robert Hale turned to Darius. "And your ticket, sir? It's valid?" "Completely." "Then," the captain said, slow and deliberate, "there's nothing to discuss. Whoever booked it first keeps it." Victor froze. "You can't." "I can," the captain interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. "And I just did." Darius didn't speak. He sat still, the faintest hint of a smile in his eyes, the look of a man who understood that sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It simply needs the courage to stay seated. The entire cabin froze. Captain Robert Hale's voice cut through the air, not loud, but sharp enough to slice through every remaining trace of noise. "If the ticket is valid, the passenger keeps the seat. No one has the right to take what's already been paid for. That's the end of it." All eyes turned toward him. Monica Reyes stood upright, almost on instinct. Victor Lang's face drained of color. "Are you talking to me?" he asked, his voice cracking with outrage. "Who else?" Robert replied, calm and unmoved. Victor gave a sharp laugh, clinging desperately to the authority that had always obeyed him without question. "I'm Victor Lang, Lang International. I spend over $300 million a year with Apex Air." "Did you book seat 3A? Robert interrupted, his tone firm. "I requested it." "A request is not a reservation." A ripple of murmurs swept through the cabin. A few passengers tilted their heads, stifling amused smiles. Some raised their phones to record, sensing they were witnessing something rare, power being forced to yield to principle. Evan Brooks stood motionless in the aisle, sweat collecting at his wrist. He had never heard the captain speak that way. Normally, Robert Hale was a man of rigid order, but today, that very discipline had become a weapon of fairness. "Captain," Monica interjected, her voice trembling, "Mr. Lang is one of our platinum clients. If he files a complaint—" Robert turned, his gaze like a blade. "If a platinum client can take another passenger's seat simply because he spends more, then this airline needs to redefine the word service." "And you," he said, locking eyes with her, "you're the cabin manager. You know the rules. Why did you allow this to happen?" Monica froze, her face turning pale. I was just following priority protocol." "Priority protocol does not mean trampling on someone else's rights." No one dared breathe. Victor scoffed, stepping back, raising his voice for everyone to hear. "Fine. Let me sit here and watch this airline destroy itself. I'm calling Thomas Whitaker right now." He pulled out his phone, dialing fast, his tone clipped and commanding. "Connect me to Thomas. Tell him Victor Lang is on flight 447 and someone just humiliated me on his plane." Robert stood with his arms crossed, impassive. Darius Cole remained seated, his hands resting calmly on his knees, his face unreadable. He didn't need to speak. The balance of power had already shifted, and everyone in the cabin knew it. Victor's phone was on speaker. After a few seconds, a deep, weary voice came through. "Thomas Whitaker, CEO of Apex Air." "Victor, what's going on? What's going on?" Victor nearly shouted. "I've been denied the seat I wanted on your plane. I've flown with this company for 15 years, and now they're prioritizing some nobody over me." The cabin went utterly still. A few glances flickered toward Darius. Thomas's voice stayed calm. "Was his ticket valid?" "What?" I asked. "Was the man's ticket valid, Victor?" "Yes, but I'm a platinum." "Then he keeps the seat. It's that simple." Victor stood, frozen, speechless. Thomas's voice hardened. "Captain Hale, I support your decision. No one loses a valid seat. My airline does not operate on the principle of privilege through money." "Understood, sir," Robert replied. Victor shouted, "Thomas, you'll regret this." "No," Thomas cut in firmly. "I think the one who needs to reconsider is you." The call ended. Silence filled the cabin once more. All eyes turned back to Victor Lang, the man who had just lost more than a seat. He had lost his image, his influence, and the illusion that money could buy respect. His hands trembled with fury, but no words came out. Luis Ortega, the younger security officer, stepped forward. "Sir, if you can't remain calm, we'll have to ask you to step off the plane." "You'll regret this," Victor growled, spitting each word like poison. He jerked his arm away and stormed down the aisle. As he passed Darius, he leaned close, his voice low and venomous. "You'll pay for this. I promise." Darius didn't look up. His voice was steady, cold enough to make the air tighten. "The price you just paid was losing everything that made you think you mattered." Victor froze, his face twitching, but he said nothing and kept walking. The cabin door opened. 2 security officers escorted him out as dozens of silent eyes followed. When the door closed, Captain Hale looked around and spoke clearly. "There will be no room for discrimination or abuse of power on this flight. If anyone here believes they're more important than the person next to them, they can leave right now." No one moved. Then from seat 4A, a young woman with brown skin began to clap softly. Her smile met Darius's eyes. The applause spread, row by row, seat by seat, until the entire cabin joined in, a quiet, collective message of gratitude. "Thank you for not giving up your seat. Thank you for staying." Robert nodded slightly toward Darius. "Thank you for staying calm. Not everyone could have done that." Darius replied, "Thank you for being fair. Not everyone would have dared." The captain smiled faintly, then turned and walked back to the cockpit. When he was gone, Darius leaned back in his seat and exhaled, his shoulders finally easing. It wasn't relief of victory. It was exhaustion. The emotions inside him tangled, anger, sorrow, and a fragile kind of hope that maybe, just maybe, some people still chose what was right. He closed his eyes briefly. Outside, the morning light tilted across the wing of the plane. He didn't yet know that in just a few minutes, when he looked out that same window, what he saw would save more than 200 lives. And Flight Apex Air 447 would be remembered not for a seat dispute, but for one man who stayed and saw what no one else did. The cabin door closed, and the air slowly eased, but Darius Cole still felt something uneasy in his chest, a silence that didn't bring peace. He leaned back in his seat, turning slightly to look out the window. Morning light gleamed off the plane's wing, metallic and flawless. Everything looked perfect until he saw it, a thin black line, no thicker than a thread, running along the root of the right wing, just beneath engine number 2. His brow furrowed. At first he thought it was oil residue, but the way the light reflected showed the dark streak slowly spreading, shimmering faintly, just like something he had seen hundreds of times during his years at Boeing. A hydraulic leak. His heartbeat faltered. Darius leaned closer to the window, narrowing his eyes. There was no mistake. The dark oil streak stretched nearly the length of his hand, slowly seeping outward. To anyone else, it would look like nothing, but to him, a man who had spent 15 years as a jet engine inspection engineer, it was the kind of detail that spelled airborne disaster. He drew a sharp breath and stood abruptly. "Sir!" Monica Reyes rushed over, her voice tight with alarm. "Please sit down. The plane is about to take off." "There's a serious problem," Darius said firmly, his tone calm but commanding enough to make her stop in her tracks. "You must remain seated, Mr. Cole. There's a hydraulic leak on engine 2, right wing." The words hit like a shock wave. Monica froze. Her face went rigid, eyes blinking rapidly, as if trying to decide whether he was serious or just retaliating for what had happened earlier. Darius quickly pulled a worn identification card from his wallet, a faded Boeing engineer's ID. "I worked as a jet propulsion systems inspector for 15 years. I know exactly what I'm looking at." Monica stammered, I'll notify the captain." She turned, grabbing the interphone. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Captain Hale, passenger in 3A, reports a possible oil leak on engine 2. The captain's voice came through the speaker. "Have him return to his seat. The crew will inspect after takeoff." Darius gripped the armrest, his voice turning hard as steel. "No. Tell him Darius Cole needs to speak with him immediately. Former Boeing engineer. This is a critical safety issue." Monica's head snapped up. That name, Cole, it struck a chord in her memory. The CEO had just mentioned that name during the call with Victor Lang. She quickly returned to the line. "Captain, the passenger's name is Darius Cole. I think you'll want to hear him out." 30 seconds later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Robert Hale stepped into the cabin, his face stern. "Mr. Cole, what did you see?" Darius pointed to the window. "Engine 2 beneath the wing joint, hydraulic line connection. There's a dark streak oil leak, small but spreading. At full takeoff pressure, there's an 80% chance the line will rupture." The captain bent down, peering closely through the glass. He held his breath for several seconds. When he looked up, his expression had changed completely. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing his radio. "Ground crew, check engine 2. Possible hydraulic leak. Hold all takeoff procedures immediately." The cabin erupted in murmurs. A few passengers stood, asking what was happening, while flight attendants moved quickly to calm them down. Monica stared at Darius, her eyes wide with shock, and something else. Shame. 3 minutes later, the intercom crackled with a reply. "Captain, confirmed hydraulic leak. It's from the main pressure line. If pressure rises, it could rupture completely." The captain clenched his radio, his voice low. "If we had taken off," Darius replied, his tone steady, "we'd lose system pressure, control surfaces, and stability. The result? Total loss of control." Robert Hale exhaled slowly, his voice deep and grave. "You just saved over 200 lives." He picked up the cabin microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've discovered a serious technical issue. For your safety, this flight will not be departing. Please remain calm and prepare to deplane while we conduct further inspections." The cabin filled with groans and sighs, but within the noise, a ripple of silence spread outward from seat 3A, the seat of the man who had just saved them all, the same man they'd tried to make move. The captain turned to him, his voice sincere. "Mr. Cole, thank you. Without you—" "Don't thank me," Darius interrupted softly. "I just did what anyone should do. Look carefully, instead of looking away." As passengers began disembarking, Darius remained seated, gazing out the window. The oil stain still shimmered faintly in the light, a dark vein against silver metal, a reminder that sometimes the one who refuses to move is the one who keeps everything from falling. Captain Hale stood beside him, radio in hand, voice low. "You know, I've flown for 30 years. Never seen anyone spot a leak from a passenger seat." Darius gave a faint smile. "Experience and instinct. Two things money can't buy." Hale nodded, genuine respect in his eyes. "I'll report this to headquarters. They need to know what happened." Darius shrugged slightly. "They'll know. Trust me." At that moment, his phone buzzed. Julia Park. The message contained just 4 words. "Thomas Whitaker knows now." Darius glanced once more out the window. Beneath the blazing morning sun, the aircraft stood motionless on the runway, a giant bird grounded before disaster. No one on board knew how close they had come to never touching the earth again. He whispered to himself, not for anyone else, but as a quiet truth. Sometimes, not moving is the only way to save everyone. And in that instant, with sunlight pouring over the tarmac, Darius Cole understood. The seat they had tried to take from him wasn't just a seat. It was destiny's place, where justice, dignity, and human life had crossed paths. 15 minutes later, every passenger had disembarked. The terminal buzzed with low voices, the cold white lights reflecting off faces that carried both confusion and gratitude. In a quiet corner, Darius Cole sat alone, calm as ever. His laptop was open before him, but his fingers didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, where a new message from Julia Park had just appeared. "Thomas Whitaker is on his way. Be ready." Be ready for what? He knew. Not to explain, but to reset the order of things. This time, not inside an airplane cabin, but within an entire system that had long measured people by the weight of their wallets. The sound of hurried footsteps made heads turn. Captain Robert Hale entered, followed by Monica Reyes and Evan Brooks. Monica's face was still pale, and Evan's head hung low, his hands clasped tightly, palms damp with sweat. Robert stopped in front of Darius and nodded. Maintenance confirmed it. Major hydraulic leak. If we had taken off, the main line would have ruptured within 10 minutes. Which means, Darius said quietly, you just saved 247 lives. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Monica's voice trembled. Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology. Darius turned toward her. There was no anger in his expression, only the calm resignation of a man who had heard apologies like this far too often, but rarely seen them followed by action. No need to apologize, he said softly. Just remember. Robert smiled faintly. Actually, I'm the one who'll remember. In over 30 years of flying, no one has ever made me abort a takeoff because of a passenger's warning, and been right. Darius replied, I just did what I always do. Observe. When people get used to bowing their heads, they miss a lot. I don't. At that moment, Monica's phone buzzed, her voice tight as she repeated the message aloud. All crew remain in place. The CEO is on his way. The room's energy shifted. Evan whispered under his breath, Thomas Whitaker. Minutes later, Thomas Whitaker, CEO of Apex Air, arrived. A man in his early 60s with silver hair, a quick stride, and eyes that spoke of discipline and fatigue. He didn't speak right away, only scanned the room until his gaze landed on Darius. Mr. Cole, he said in a deep, steady voice. I've read the report. Is it true? Darius nodded slightly. There was a leak. I saw it from the window. And if it hadn't been caught in time, we'd have lost everything, Robert answered for him. Thomas inhaled deeply. His eyes flickered, as if realizing the gravity of the man sitting before him. May I ask? You are? Darius cut in, his tone quiet but absolute. Darius Cole, CEO of Cole Capital Partners. My company holds 18% of Apex Air's shares. The silence hit like an explosion. Monica's mouth fell open. Evan stepped back, and Captain Hale's eyebrows lifted slightly, an attempt to mask his astonishment. Thomas blinked hard. Good Lord, I had no idea you were. No one did, Darius interrupted, because that's how I wanted it. I didn't board that flight as a shareholder. I boarded as an ordinary passenger. And what I experienced was exactly how your airline treats people it considers ordinary. His voice was calm, but every word dropped like a stone breaking the surface of still water. I was asked to give up the seat I paid for. I was threatened, humiliated, because someone else was considered more deserving. If I had stood up then, who would have been sitting there to see the leak? Thomas said nothing. Evan lowered his head. Monica's eyes glistened as she clenched her hands against her uniform. Mr. Cole, Thomas began quietly. Darius raised a hand to stop him. No apologies. I'm not here for that. I just want your people to understand something. Safety isn't only in the engines. It's in how we see each other. When an airline starts believing that some people matter more than others, that's when every system begins to leak, and no one notices. The room fell silent. The only sound was a distant boarding announcement, echoing from another gate, cold and mechanical. Robert Hale spoke softly, almost in confession. You know, I've seen passengers scream, demand, threaten, but I've never seen anyone stay silent and make an entire pin fall silent with them. You didn't shout, you didn't push, you just stayed. And you made us all look at ourselves. Darius smiled faintly. Sometimes, true strength isn't in speaking up. It's in not moving when the world tells you to get out of the way. Thomas stepped forward and extended his hand. Apex Air owes you more than thanks. You reminded me what this airline was built for. Darius shook his hand, but his tone remained calm. Not for me, Mr. Whitaker. For the 247 people who almost didn't make it home. For the child waiting for his father in New York. For the mother waiting for her son. They're the reason I stayed. Robert Hale drew a deep breath. He realized something in that moment. The man before him wasn't just a shareholder or a hero. He was a reminder that in this world of metal, rules, and pressure, human dignity was still the most vital software in every system. When Darius left the room, the late afternoon light streamed through the glass, wrapping him in a soft, golden glow. He didn't speak, only walked slowly, each step carrying the quiet weight of what was right. Near the waiting area, the brown-skinned woman from seat 4A recognized him and stood. You were the man in 3A, weren't you? Darius stopped and nodded. She smiled, her voice trembling with emotion. Thank you for not standing up. Darius looked out toward the runway, where the sun was dipping below the horizon, and said softly, It's nothing. Sometimes, just sitting in the right place can change the entire sky. 3 hours later, inside the VIP lounge at San Francisco International Airport, Darius Cole sat across from Thomas Whitaker, the CEO of Apex Air. Beside them were Captain Robert Hale, still in uniform, and Julia Park, General Counsel of Cole Capital, who had flown in urgently from Los Angeles. No one spoke for the first few seconds. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the faint tapping of a secretary's tablet keyboard across the room. Thomas was the first to break the silence. His voice was hoarse, tired, yet carried the weight of a man who had led through 100 crises. Mr. Cole, he began, I've reviewed everything, the footage from the passengers, the cabin cameras, and the audio recording you sent. I've seen it all. He paused, inhaled deeply, his eyes heavy with regret. I wish I hadn't had to see how my employees treated you, or anyone like you. Darius said nothing. There was no triumph, no bitterness, only the calm gaze of a man holding up an unflinching mirror to the truth. This isn't new, Mr. Whitaker, he said quietly. It's just the first time it's been caught on camera. Thomas nodded faintly, then turned to Robert Hale. Engineering confirmed? Yes, sir, Robert replied. The hydraulic line was cracked, oil leaking. If we'd taken off, the control system would have failed within 8 to 10 minutes. The outcome freefall. The room went silent. Thomas pressed a hand to his forehead. Mr. Cole, you saved 247 lives today. I owe you a debt that can't be repaid. Julia spoke up then, her tone measured, sharp as glass. That debt shouldn't be repaid in words. It needs to be written into policy and action. Thomas looked at her, then back at Darius. I understand. So I want to ask, what do you want this airline to do? Darius leaned back, his voice steady, deliberate. I don't want money, recognition, or public apologies. I want structural change. Because the problem isn't a few bad people, it's a culture that lets them believe a person's worth can be calculated in loyalty points. Thomas fell silent. Darius continued, his tone unwavering. From this day forward, Apex Air must implement the following. 1. Mandatory bias and ethics training for all employees, from crew to management, every quarter. 2. Independent audits of service conduct and complaint ratios with full public disclosure. 3. A passenger bill of rights guaranteeing equal respect and treatment for every customer, regardless of class. 4. A $50 million independent oversight fund run by a third-party organization to monitor human rights and equality across the airline industry. And finally, diversify your executive leadership. I want to see different colors, genders, and backgrounds in every boardroom. Every word landed like a hammer breaking the walls of an old order. Julia nodded faintly, her eyes catching the moment. Thomas, perhaps for the first time all meeting, didn't argue, didn't defend, only listened. After a pause, he exhaled and said softly, "You just redefined the airline industry, Mr. Cole." "No," Darius replied. "I'm just redefining how people should treat one another." Thomas rose from his chair, walked around the table, and extended his hand. "Apex Air agrees. All of it. 50 million, the independent fund, mandatory training, public audits. I'll sign the commitment today." They shook hands. The golden light from the ceiling lamps spilled over the polished wood table where a new agreement lay. More than a document, it was a promise written in honor and consequence. After Thomas left, Robert lingered. His expression carried both admiration and remorse. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think justice lived in procedures. But you made me realize sometimes justice begins with the one person who refuses to move." Darius smiled faintly. "Thank you, Captain. I wasn't fighting your airline. I was fighting the way people forget who the airline exists for." Evan Brooks and Monica Reyes entered, faces drawn and tired. They had heard the news. They were suspended. Monica's voice trembled. "Mr. Cole, I know an apology means nothing now, but I never meant to insult you. I thought I was doing what was right." Darius looked at her, his eyes free of anger. "I believe you. But sometimes, following orders isn't the same as doing what's right." She nodded, tears brimming. "I understand now." After they left, Julia turned to Darius. "Do you think Thomas will keep his word?" Darius glanced toward the window, where planes were taking off into a sunset sky, their silver wings glinting in orange light. "If he doesn't, I'll make sure he never gets to fly again." Julia smiled. "You're still the same man I've always known. Not loud, but the kind who makes the world go silent just to listen." Darius shrugged slightly. "I don't want the world silent. I just want it to hear what's right." In the distance, the airport's giant screen lit up with breaking news. Apex Air announces the creation of a $50 million independent oversight fund to ensure equality and respect for all passengers. CEO Thomas Whitaker states the decision follows an incident on Flight 447, where a passenger identified a critical technical fault, saving hundreds of lives. Darius watched the words scroll across the screen. His expression wasn't proud, just quietly resolved. He knew this wasn't a headline. It was the consequence of refusing to stand. He smiled faintly, weary, but at peace. "In the end," he murmured, almost to himself, "every real change begins with the moment someone says no." And this time that no had saved not just a flight, but a belief. A week after the Apex Air 447 incident, American media exploded. Headlines filled every major outlet. The man forced to give up his seat saved 247 lives. When one passenger said no, the entire airline industry stopped. Darius Cole, the hidden CEO, and the lesson on human dignity. The story spread like wildfire, not just because it was dramatic, but because it touched something deep in the human spirit, the belief that fairness still exists. Over that week, Darius received hundreds of calls, interview requests, book offers, and media deals. He refused them all. He knew this story wasn't meant to be a sensation, but a turning point. On Monday, at the National Aviation Conference in Washington, D.C., the Grand Hall shimmered under white light reflecting off the Apex Air logo and a newly hung banner above the stage that read, "Dignity takes flight." When the host announced the man from seat 3A, over 1,000 people, airline CEOs, politicians, FAA officials, journalists, activists rose to their feet in applause. The sound echoed beneath the dome like a storm of awakening. Darius Cole stepped onto the stage. No notes, no teleprompter. Just a man in a simple grey suit, calm eyes, and a voice that moved like a steady heartbeat. "A week ago," he began, "I sat in seat 3A, a normal business class seat on a normal flight. Then I was asked to move, not because of a technical issue, but because someone more important wanted it." He paused, scanning the silent room. "I said no, not out of pride, but because if I stood up, I would be teaching myself that silence is acceptable. But when I stayed, I saw what no one else did. A thin streak under the wing. A small leak that could have cost us all our lives." His tone deepened, eyes gleaming beneath the stage lights. "Sometimes justice isn't in the shouting, it's in the decision to stay, to not let anyone take your place, even if it's just a seat." Hundreds of eyes stayed fixed on him. A few people quietly wiped their tears. A reporter whispered to her colleague, "I've never seen a speech make a room this still." Darius continued, "I didn't save that flight because I'm an engineer or because I'm a shareholder. I saved it because I was there, because I wasn't erased from where I was supposed to be. And that's what I want the world to remember. Everyone deserves to be in the place they've earned." He lifted his head, voice firm, resonant. "Dignity is not a privilege for the wealthy. It is the birthright of every human being." Applause erupted, this time not polite, but powerful, from hearts beating in unison. In the front row, Thomas Whitaker stood and walked to the stage, shaking Darius's hand as camera flashes burst across the room. "Today," he said, "Apex Air officially launches the Passenger Bill of Rights, the first policy in U.S. aviation to protect the equality of all travelers. We are also establishing a $50 million independent oversight fund, managed by a third party, to monitor our internal practices. And," he turned toward Darius, voice thick with emotion, "we begin with you." The hall rose again in applause. Some airline executives exchanged looks, not of rivalry, but of acknowledgement. A new standard had just been set. 3 months later, the reforms began to spread. Other carriers followed suit. Skyline, NorthJet, AmeriLink, all announced new training programs on bias awareness and passenger equality. The FAA issued new regulations requiring quarterly independent audits. One evening, Darius sat in his office at Cole Capital, the city lights reflecting off the glass wall behind him. His phone buzzed, a message from the woman who had sat in seat 4A that day. Flying with Apex today. The crew bowed to every passenger by name, no difference between anyone. Looks like you really did change the sky. Darius smiled softly, peace glimmering in his eyes. He typed back, "Not me. Us. The ones who refused to bow when told we didn't belong." He set the phone down and looked out the window. In the distance, a plane lifted into the night, its guiding lights stretching like a line of stars. Darius whispered, "Look at that. Dignity can fly too." That night, he posted a short video on social media. His voice was warm, calm, without music or editing. If you see injustice, don't stay silent. If you're looked down on, don't give up your seat. Because when you stay, you're not just holding your place, you're holding it for everyone who comes after. Within 4 hours, the video had over 3 million shares. Thousands of comments poured in, stories from restaurants, banks, offices, schools, all echoing the same message. I won't stand up either. Weeks later, at a small airport in Atlanta, a young flight attendant stood before an elderly passenger who was being asked to give up his seat for a special guest. She took a deep breath and said softly, "I'm so sorry for the confusion, sir. This seat belongs to you. I don't want to be the reason you have to move." The passenger smiled. He didn't know her name, but she knew one thing. That was how change begins. Outside, the sky burned with hues of sunset as an Apex airplane took off, its shadow gliding over the clouds. And on every flight where passengers sat down, knowing they would be treated with respect, people quietly whispered a reminder to each other. Remember seat 3A. Because sometimes even a single seat can keep the world from falling apart. From the perspective of an expert in ethics and corporate culture, the story of Darius Cole is not merely an aviation incident, but a flawless reflection of how power and human dignity collide in the modern world. In a place where privilege is often taken for granted, he proved that true strength does not belong to those who shout the loudest, but to those who have the courage to stay when the world tells them to leave. Darius did not just save 247 lives. He saved a principle that the world had started to forget, that every human being deserves to be seen, respected, and allowed to sit in the place they have earned. From an ordinary business-class seat to a symbol of justice, from a single word no to an industry-wide reform, he left behind a timeless message. Dignity needs no validation. It only needs to be upheld. And now, as you reach this moment, perhaps you understand, the world doesn't change through the loudest voices, but through those who refuse to bow their heads. If you believe that respect is not a privilege, but a responsibility shared by every human being, then like this video, subscribe to the channel to spread the power of justice and leave a comment. I will not stand up.